Alright, so before I start this video, I'd like to point out that this video is not about sound quality or designing an audiophile enclosure that is practical and sounds good with all music, but it's instead focused on gaining as much SPL as possible at super low frequencies around 20 Hz, using whatever equipment you've got. Really, it's just about getting low, loud and windy on a budget. In this video, I'll be showing you how to get most subwoofers to play super low. This is done by designing a ported enclosure for it that'll boost performance at lower frequencies, unlike most company prefab enclosures or enclosures built to recommended specs given by subwoofer companies. So, let's get into it. When getting a subwoofer to play super low in the mid to low 20s and even the infrasonic region, there are two main things that will help this happen. Number one, the subwoofer itself. This really isn't that important and is really only about 15 to 20% of the problem. Number two, the box or enclosure. This is seriously about 85% of what will allow your subwoofer to play low. So first, let's talk about the subwoofer. Almost any subwoofer can be used in this scenario as long as 1. It's got a decent Xmax rating. Preferably around 20mm one way or higher, but it's okay if it's not quite 20mm, that just means you won't be able to push it as hard. 2. It has a decent power rating. To be honest, there's no real recommendation I can give for this. It all comes down to personal preference and how loud you want to play. Anything over 500 watts should do, but obviously, as always, higher is better. Of course, SPL subs with high roll surrounds and soft suspension will always do better on lower frequencies, so this is good to keep in mind as well. 3. This is the most important one. You have to ensure that the subwoofer is intended for use in a ported enclosure. This is decided by the subwoofer's EBP value, which stands for Efficiency Bandwidth Product. This can be calculated by taking its FS value and dividing it by the QES value. If the efficiency bandwidth product is anywhere from around 50 to 100 units, it will work great, as this means it's best in a ported enclosure. However, if the EBP value is closer to 0, like under 25, the subwoofer will probably not work very well in a ported enclosure, and therefore probably shouldn't be used. However, it could still be worth a shot though. The Dayton Ultimax subs have relatively low EBP values, with the Ultimax 18 reading only 31.5, but they perform extremely well in ported boxes. But I'd still recommend following this rule. PS, if your subwoofer is a random one that you can't find the TL small parameters for, building a box like this for it will be a complete shot in the dark, but could still turn out pretty well. Alright, so now that we've checked if your subwoofer will fit the job, we can get on with the big part of this video, which is designing the enclosure. The first thing you need to do is download WinISD, a free speaker box design program for Windows that is essential for this tutorial. I'll leave a link to this in the description. If you have a Mac, you might be able to get it to run using Wineskin, and if not, try to find another good program for subwoofer enclosure design. When it comes to designing a ported subwoofer enclosure, there are two main important things that will determine how it plays: the net internal volume of the box and the port tuning, which is a combination of port length and physical area. Now, the general rules of thumb I've found is that for your subwoofer to play low, 1. The box needs to have a net internal volume that is around 1.33 times larger than the one in the company's recommended specs. 2. The box should be tuned to around 20 Hz. You can adjust this according to which tuning frequency creates the nicest response for your liking, according to WinISD. These two rules are not definite and can be adjusted to your liking. They're simply just good rules to use when beginning to model in WinISD. Once you've downloaded it, just open up the installer and go through the process of installing it. Open it up once it has installed and you'll be greeted by a blank graph with a few buttons up the top. Click on the speaker one labeled Driver Database, and this should bring up a new window where we can add our subwoofer and its TS parameters. Simply start by adding the brand name and model number of your subwoofer, then click over to the Parameters tab. Here, you'll want to get a list of TS parameters for your subwoofer up on the screen at the same time. Begin copying in each parameter from your list to the corresponding one in WinISD. Also, make sure that the measurement units in WinISD are the same as the ones in your list. If there are some that don't match up, simply cycle through each measurement unit in WinISD by clicking on it until you find one that you need. Try to fill in as many of the boxes as you can. It's okay if there are some left out, as your list of parameters won't come with every single one. Once you finish filling them in, you can now click Save and save the details for your driver to the folder. Now click the little blank page icon up the top, which is second from the left, and then choose your driver. There'll be a huge list of pre-installed ones, so you'll just have to search through all of them until you find yours. Once you've selected it, hit next. Choose how many of them you'll be using in the box. In my case, it's just one. then hit next. Now change the type of design from closed to vented and then hit next again. Then select the Chevy Chev as the alignment and once again hit next. Now just give the design a name. Once you've done that, you can hit next for a final time and boom, a graph should appear on the screen. Click on the little wrench up the top and then go to plot window and make sure your settings look the same as mine. Finally, we can start designing the box. Make sure the box tab is selected down the bottom. Once that's done, I recommend importing the subwoofer's recommended volume and tuning frequency, just to get an idea of how it models normally. From here on, you can tweak it to your liking and get your desired frequency response out of the box. Also, when using WinISD's transfer function magnitude graph, which is the one that's already selected, 0 decibels is a good place to be and is simply the most appropriate level of output for your subwoofer. Higher than 0 decibels is great, and a little bit under it is also alright, but anything close to negative 10 decibels should not be the frequencies that you want to play. Negative 10 decibels in real life will be only half as loud as the 0 decibel region, because to the human ear, every time you add 10 decibels, it is perceived to be twice as loud as before. Another very useful tip is that doubling the input power to a speaker generally increases output by 3 decibels. So let's say that on 500 watts I'm doing 130 decibels at 20 Hz and 133 decibels at 30 Hz. In order to make the sound pressure level or SPL at 20 Hz the same as the SPL at 30 Hz, I would have to push 1000 watts in 20 Hz instead of 500, which the sub may not take anyway. That's why it's important to design the box to play how you want it to play. So now I'm going to take the internal volume and increase it by 1.33 times, which is 4 cubic feet, and I'm also going to tune it to 25 Hz. As you can see, this just boosted the output of the lows, which almost wasn't there at all originally. But I feel like we could still get way lower. To see if I can make the box bigger, I'm going to go down to the signal tab and enter how much power I'll be pushing to the sub. In this case, I'm just going to put 1000 watts since it's the RMS rating. From here, I'm going to go up to the top again and click the pink and blue graph icon. Change this to cone excursion. This will show the excursion of the sub in the box at 1000 watts at all frequencies. This red line indicates the sub's Xmax, so we should try and design a box that doesn't get too close to the red line. In this case, the sub hits Xmax at 20 Hz, so in the real world, I would just have to set the high pass filter on the amplifier to decrease the power around this area. But overall, this box is looking very good and doesn't get close to the Xmax at all in the other frequencies. So I think we can get away with making it even bigger. I'm going to click back to the box tab and take a huge shot in the dark and make it 5 cubic feet. This is absolutely huge for an SA15 V2 and about 1.66 times bigger than recommended. I'm now going to tune it to 20 Hz and see what we get. And boom, look at that. Only 4 decibels down at 20 Hz, meaning that 20 Hz would be completely audible and actually quite loud in the car. Let's check the excursion again by clicking on the button up the top. And wow, the sub only hits Xmax at 17 Hz now, so we would again just need to use a high pass filter on the amplifier. But I'm very impressed with this. An SA15 V2 playing down to 18 Hz with ease and then only just starting to drop off after. Now, keep in mind that this box is not the most efficient at all and will not be anywhere near as loud with high notes as the recommended box. But if we compare it to the box that Sundown recommends, it plays impressively lower. So, since we've now worked out the box volume and port tuning, we now need to decide on the final factor, the optimal port area for the box. Getting this right is important because if it's too small, you'll get a lot of unwanted port noise, and if it's too large, the subwoofer will have less cone control, which is where the average excursion increases and it bottoms out more easily. A good rule for port area and car audio is that for every cubic foot of your box's net volume, there should be 16 square inches of port area. This is not perfect, but it's a good place to start for calculating a port area that works for your box. The way that port area usually works is like this. As port area gets larger, the subwoofer's excursion and SPL increase, and port noise and wind or air velocity decrease. As port area decreases, the subwoofer's excursion and SPL also decrease slightly, but the amount of wind it makes or the port's air velocity increases a lot. However, keep in mind that making port area too big or small can bring about unwanted effects. For example, making it too big will bring about unwanted hollow sounding bass and allow the sub to hit Xmax more easily, therefore making it harder to play low due to overexcursion. If you make the port area too small, you'll lose significant SPL and hear a lot of port chuffing due to compression. In WinISD, you'll be able to check the port velocity, and from there we'll be able to modify it to whatever works best for your sub. A port air velocity of 17 meters a second is perfectly optimal. You won't hear any port chuffing at this speed and it should sound good. Realistically, you can have up to 30 meters a second, but you may hear a bit of port chuffing at this velocity. So, since my box's net volume is going to be 5 cubic feet, I'm going to multiply 5 by 16 to get a rough estimate of the port area, which is 80 square inches. For some boxes, this will work great, but you'll probably have to modify it just a little bit. I'll break this part of the video into two parts, slot ports and error ports. To find the diameter for your error port, divide your port area by pi, then square root it, and then multiply it by 2. This will give you the perfect diameter for your error port in inches. Of course, error ports only come in so many sizes, so you'll have to pick whatever is closest to this diameter when buying one. Keep in mind that the port area will change greatly when you change the diameter of the error port. An error port with a diameter of 4 inches gives you an area of 12.57 square inches, but an error port with a diameter of 6 inches gives you an area of 28.27 square inches, over twice as much. I'll put a table on the screen of the areas of different error port sizes to make it easy for you to choose what size you need. Let's say you wanted 100 square inches of port area. You could either go with one 11-inch error port, 2 8s, or 5 5s. It's just whatever works best for you. I'll also mention real quick that the error ports are more efficient than slot ports due to their circular shape. You generally won't need as much port area when using error ports instead of slot ports. Another big bonus of using error ports is that if you install multiple, you can plug one to change the tuning of your box temporarily. Now onto slot ports. Deciding the dimensions for this can be done however you want, but I like to build my boxes with the port extending from the bottom of the front baffle to the top. So for this sub, since it's 15 inches in diameter, I'm going to make the front baffle of the box 16 inches tall. Therefore, since the port will go from the top of the front baffle to the bottom, it will also be 16 inches tall. To figure out how wide it'll be initially, I'm going to divide the total port area by the height to get the width. 80 divided by 16 is 5, so the port will be 5 inches wide. We can adjust this width later in WinISD to get a good port area that works well. Now that I've explained slot ports and error ports, we can go back into WinISD. Head over to the Vents tab and enter the dimensions for your port. It will start off being circular, but if you click on it, it will turn into a rectangular port. My port dimensions are now in the program, so I can go up to the top to the pink graph again, and this time change it to rear port air velocity. If I click on the graph, I can see that my air velocity only ever reaches around 14 meters a second, which is completely fine and entirely inaudible. Because it's so low, I'm actually going to shrink the port width a little bit to make the overall box a bit smaller and get some more wind out of it. So I'll make the width 4 inches instead of 5. And as you can see, that took the top air velocity up to 17.5 meters a second, which is completely optimal still. Let's try a width of 3.5. And it's about 20 meters a second. This is fine for me, as a tiny bit of port noise doesn't bother me at all, and the box should be putting out a decent amount of wind with this velocity. Keep in mind that lower tuned boxes require much less port area than higher tuned ones. This is my current box with the 16 by 3.5 inch port tuned to 20 Hz and then tuned to 35 Hz. The 20 Hz tune has a max velocity of 20 meters a second, while the 35 Hz tune reaches 24.5 meters a second, so it would need a bigger port area. And that just about covers designing an optimal port. To sum up, just aim for around 17 meters a second. If you want more wind, shrink the port and get the velocity a bit higher. But port noise won't become a serious issue until around 30 meters a second usually. Higher tuning needs bigger ports, lower tuning needs smaller ports, and that's about it. The final part of this video will be about designing the real world box, the dimensions for each piece of wood and how they will all go together. If you already know how to do this or you have your own way of doing it, I recommend just skipping this part of the video. There are a few ways to do this: pen, paper, and a calculator, or using design software. I usually design my boxes with the 3D modeling program called Fusion 360, but for this video I'll be using a free website called Subbox Pro. I've found this website to be very good and generally very accurate when designing boxes, but there are a few things to be careful of. Head over to subbox.pro. I'll have the link in the description below. Once the page is loaded, go down to where it says net internal volume and change the value from 2.3 to whatever your box's internal volume is. Then go down to material thickness and enter the thickness of the wood you'll be using to build it. I'll enter 0.71 inches because I build boxes out of 18mm MDF board. Now go to the subwoofer tab and change the size from 12 inches to whatever you're using. If you're using multiple subs, change the quantity from one to something else. Now enter your sub's baffle cutout diameter in inches, and then the mounting depth, and then finally the woofer displacement. Once you've done this, go to the port tab and change the type from pipe right panel to whatever you need. For this tutorial, I'll be using the slot front panel. Now I can enter my tuning frequency, which is 20 Hz, and my port area, which is 56 inches squared. Here's an important part that you don't want to miss. Make sure the port length in Subbox Pro matches up with the port length in WinISD. Go to the Vents tab in WinISD and get your recommended port length from there. If the length in Subbox Pro is wrong and doesn't match up, then lower the tuning slightly to make it longer, or make the tuning higher to make it shorter. This is only necessary because Subbox Pro doesn't have the most accurate calculations for port length. If you click on the display of the boxes and drag your mouse around, you'll be able to see what the box is looking like. The port will probably be going outside of the box, but don't worry, we'll fix that. Once the port length in Subbox Pro matches up with the one in WinISD, you can go back to the box tab and adjust the width and height of the box to your liking. I'm going to make the height 17.42 inches and the width 35 inches. And here I've run into a slight issue. If your box is tuned higher than 20 Hz, you most likely won't run into this issue, but as you can see, my port doesn't fit inside the box when it's arranged like this. Subbox Pro doesn't have the ability to design a port that will always fit, so I have to take what I have here and either use 3D modeling software or just pen and paper to do the rest. If your port fits inside the box and has enough clearance at the end of it, the clearance must be equal to the port width, or longer by the way, so in my case 3.5 inches, then you can simply go to the top left corner and click plan, which will give you the blueprints to build your sub with, and you can finish watching here. If your port is going outside of the box like mine, follow these next few steps. So before I start this part of the video, I want to mention that modifying the box to get the port to fit inside it will result in a port that is 1 to 2 inches longer, therefore lowering the tuning only a tiny bit. As you can see, the second port wall in my box must be 43.61 inches long. The longest it can be without being too long is from the left side of the first wall to 3.5 inches away from the left baffle, as that's the port width. So with this logic, I'll need 3 port walls instead of 2 to fit the entire port inside of the box. To figure out the length of the second one, I'll start with the internal length of the box, which is 33.58 inches. I'll subtract the port width from the right side, which is 3.5 inches, and then the width of the first wall, which is 0.71 inches, and then finally the required clearance area for the port width on the left baffle. Subtracting all of those values leaves me with the measurement for the second wall, which has a length of 25.87 inches. To find the length of the third port wall, we'll subtract the new second wall length, which is 25.87 inches, from the original second wall length, which was 43.61 inches. This gives a measurement of 17.74 inches. So now we have all 3 walls calculated. The first one is 23.3 inches long, and the second one is 25.87 inches long, and the third one is 17.74 inches long. The final design will look something like this, which I'll show you how to make pretty soon. To figure out the internal volume that we'll be losing by doing this, we just need to figure out the volume of the third wall area and then subtract it from the original 5 cubic feet. So the length is 17.74 inches and the width and height are the same as the rest of the port dimensions from WinISD, so a width of 3.5 inches and a height of 16 inches. If we multiply these 3 values together, we get our volume in cubic inches. For my box, I'm losing 993.44 cubic inches. Convert this to cubic feet and I get 0.57 cubic feet. So instead of my box's internal volume being 5 cubic feet, it'll be 4.43. There's a pretty simple method I came up with to help fix this loss of volume that consists of extending the depth of your box forwards to try and gain back lost volume, while also modifying the length of the whole port so the opening is still parallel with the front baffle. So, since I lost 0.57 cubic feet, or even better, 993.44 cubic inches, that's what I need to gain back in volume by extending the front baffle further forwards. To find the depth of this extra volume, I'm going to take the volume I need to gain back in cubic inches and divide it by the internal length of the box. Then divide the new value by the internal height of the box, which is 16 inches. Now you'll be left with how much deeper you need to make your box. For me, it's 1.85 inches. Doing this will get the internal volume back to exactly 5 cubic feet. But now, the port coming around on the right side of the box won't be parallel with the front baffle, so let's just extend it forwards by the same amount that we had to extend the rest of the box, which again is 1.58 inches for me. This slight port extension will only lower my tuning by 0.23 Hz, which doesn't matter at all. Yours will probably be the same. Finally, we can design the very final version of the box. Using pen and paper will work just fine for this. I recommend starting by drawing a top-down view of the original untouched design straight from Subbox Pro, with the measurements for each piece of wood labelled on the drawing, so you can then use it as a reference to draw the final design. So this is my design right here. As you can see, I've just drawn the one that was in Subbox Pro with the exact same measurements. For the new design, I'll add the depth extension to the box to gain back the lost volume and also add the third port wall. This will require making the left and right baffles, first port wall, and the top and bottom pieces all longer. So for my box, I need to add 1.85 inches to the depth of all of those pieces. You'll need to add whatever your value was. I'll just speed up this part of the video. Alright, so now that I've drawn the outside pieces for the new box, I can add in the new 3-wall port. At the top to the left of the first port wall, you'll want to add whatever your second port wall length was. So I'll add a 25.87 inch wall extending out from the left side. Now, there should be a 3.5 inch gap from the end of the second wall to the left baffle. I'm going to come down 3.5 inches and then add a third wall starting from the left baffle. If done correctly, the port width should be the same from the first wall to the right baffle, from the second wall to the back baffle, and from the third wall to the second wall. And that's it. That's the first complete design of my box from a top-down view. All you need to do now is figure out the dimensions of each piece of wood for the box. You can do this by using the measurements from your final design and then using their original heights from the website, which for my box is 16 inches for every single piece of wood except for the top and bottom pieces, of course. So for example, my box's left baffle would be 28.65 inches by 16 inches. The right baffle would be 29.36 inches by 16 inches, and so on. Once you've determined the length and height for every single piece of wood, you can then start cutting out wood and building your box. In my box build video, you can see that I'm always referring to a piece of paper that shows the cutout dimensions for each piece of wood. If you followed every step of the video correctly, you should have an awesome box that'll play exactly the way you designed it to. Keep in mind that cabin gain in cars does exist, so usually you'll experience a slight boost at a certain area of low frequency notes in particular when using the subwoofer box in a car compared to a house. If there was anything I missed throughout this video or anything you need help with, just let me know in the comments below. If this video helped you, it'd be great if you could leave a like. Thanks for sticking around. I'll catch you in the next one.